The stagecoach wheels ground to a halt in a cloud of dust that settled over Promise Creek like a brown shroud. Faith O'Malley stepped down from the coach, her worn leather boots meeting the hard-packed earth of Wyoming territory with determination. At 24, she cut an unusual figure in the frontier town, red hair pinned up beneath a simple brown hat, green eyes that held both intelligence and wariness, and most notably, she carried herself with the bearing of someone who had come to stay, not merely to find a husband. The driver tossed down her trunk with little ceremony, and Faith caught the disapproving glance of Mrs. Whitmore, the banker's wife, who stood across the street beneath the striped awning of Henderson's General Store. The older woman whispered something to her companion, and both women turned away with expressions of scandalized propriety. Faith had expected this. A young woman traveling alone to a frontier town, with no family waiting to claim her. No husband to meet it was enough to set tongues wagging from here to Denver. But she hadn't come to Promise Creek for their approval. She'd come with a dream that burned brighter than any gossip to establish her own newspaper. The inheritance from her late uncle in Boston, a man who'd believed in her when her own father hadn't rested heavy in her purse. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to rent a space, purchase a second-hand printing press, and keep herself fed while she built something that mattered. Miss O'Malley. She turned to find a thin man in clerical collar standing before her, hands clasped before him like a man about to deliver last rites. This would be Reverend Josiah Hathaway, she supposed. His letter had been among the few responses to her inquiries about available property in Promise Creek. Reverend Hathaway, she acknowledged with a slight nod. His gray eyes swept over her traveling dress, practical wool, unadorned, and his mouth tightened. I must confess, Miss O'Malley, when you wrote of your intentions, I assumed you would be arriving with proper companionship, a guardian, perhaps, or at the very least, a respectable female companion. I'm afraid I must disappoint you. Reverend, I travel as I intend to live on my own terms. The Reverend's face darkened. Young woman, you cannot possibly understand the impropriety of your situation. Promise Creek is a God-fearing town. We have standards, morals that must be upheld. I assure you, my morals are quite intact, Faith replied evenly. Now, about the property you mentioned in your letter, the old Wells building. He drew himself up to his full height, which wasn't particularly impressive. I cannot, in good conscience, facilitate such an arrangement. An unmarried woman, living alone, pursuing a man's profession, it would be a scandal, a shame to our community. Heat rose in Faith's cheeks, but she kept her voice steady. Then I shall make arrangements elsewhere. Good day, Reverend. She bent to grasp the handle of her trunk, struggling with its weight. The Reverend made no move to assist her, instead raising his voice so that the gathering crowd of curious onlookers could hear clearly. Mark my words, Miss O'Malley. No good will come of this folly. A woman's place is in the home, under the protection and guidance of a husband. To pretend otherwise is to invite ruin upon yourself and cast a shadow over our entire town. Faith straightened, leaving the trunk on the ground, and faced him squarely. Then I suppose Promise Creek will have to adjust to life in the shadows. Reverend, because I'm not leaving. A murmur ran through the crowd, some shocked, others almost admiring. Faith noticed a few women exchange glances that might have held a glimmer of respect, though they quickly schooled their expressions when their husbands looked their way. Where might I find Mr. Silas Martin? She asked the crowd at large, ignoring the Reverend's sputtering indignation. I understand he has property to let. An older man near the barber shop pointed down the street. Martin's office is above the land records. Miss 2 blocks down. Green door. Thank you kindly. Faith bent again to her trunk, and this time, a young boy, perhaps 12 years old, darted forward to help. His mother called him back sharply, but Faith smiled at him. Thank you, but I can manage. The boy retreated, but not before giving her a grin that suggested not everyone in Promise Creek shared the Reverend's views. It took her 3 attempts and considerable effort, but Faith managed to drag her trunk to the wooden sidewalk. Behind her, she could hear Reverend Hathaway holding forth to his audience about the decline of proper society and the dangers of modern notions. Silas Martin proved to be a pragmatic man, more interested in regular rent payments than social propriety. Within an hour, Faith had secured a lease on a narrow building squeezed between the saddlery and a boarded-up saloon. The space had previously housed a failed photography studio, and the large windows facing the street would be perfect for displaying her newspaper. "Power of the press, eh?" Martin said, pocketing her first month's rent. "Well, can't say Promise Creek doesn't need it, though I'd advise you to tread careful-like around certain topics. Reverend Hathaway's got a lot of sway in this town." "I appreciate the advice, Mr. Martin, but I didn't come here to write about church socials and quilting bees." He chuckled. "No, I don't suppose you did. Well, the place is yours. There's a small room in the back with a stove. Previous tenant lived there, too. Not much, but it's clean and dry." After Martin left, Faith stood alone in the dusty space that would become the Promise Creek Herald. Late afternoon sunlight slanted through the windows, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the air. She could envision it already, the printing press there, sorting tables along the wall, a desk where she would write the stories that needed telling. She'd studied every aspect of running a newspaper, apprenticing herself to a sympathetic editor in Boston who'd been amused by her determination. She knew how to set type, operate a press, mix ink, and most importantly, how to find and tell the stories that mattered, the stories of ordinary people struggling to build lives on the frontier, of injustices both large and small, of dreams pursued against all odds. That evening, as Faith swept out her new domain, she noticed faces peering through the windows. Word had spread quickly about the scandalous woman who thought she could run a newspaper. Some faces showed curiosity, others disapproval, and a few, particularly among the women, something that might have been envy. She paused in her sweeping to wave at Mrs. Garrett, who ran the boarding house across the street. The woman startled, then tentatively waved back before hurrying on. It was a start. As darkness fell, Faith lit the oil lamp she'd purchased from Henderson's store, along with basic supplies that the proprietor had sold her with obvious reluctance and inflated prices. The back room was indeed small, containing only a narrow cot, a pot-bellied stove, and a washstand. But it was hers, earned by her own efforts and courage. She sat on the cot and pulled out her journal, recording the day's events. Tomorrow, she would send telegrams to equipment suppliers in Denver. Within a month, she hoped to publish her first issue. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. A sharp rap on the front window made her jump. Through the lamplit glass, she could see Reverend Hathaway standing on the sidewalk, flanked by 2 members of what she assumed was his congregation. He pointed at her and said something to his companions, his face twisted with righteous anger. Faith met his gaze steadily, refusing to be cowed. After a long moment, he led his followers away, but not before making a slashing gesture across his throat, whether directed at her or her nascent newspaper. She couldn't tell. She returned to her journal, writing with renewed determination. If Reverend Hathaway thought he could frighten her away with intimidation and social pressure, he had gravely misjudged her character. She had fled Boston not from fear, but from the suffocating expectations of a society that saw her only as a potential wife and mother. Here in Promise Creek, she would forge her own path. The wild frontier might be harsh and unforgiving, but it also offered something the civilized East couldn't: the chance to become who she truly was, not who others expected her to be. And if that made her a shame to the town in Reverend Hathaway's eyes, so be it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. She knew. But tonight, in her small room behind what would soon be the Promise Creek Herald, Faith O'Malley allowed herself a moment of quiet triumph. She had taken the first step. There would be no turning back now. The bell above Henderson's general store chimed as Faith pushed through the door, her shopping list clutched in one hand. 3 weeks had passed since her arrival in Promise Creek, and while the townspeople still regarded her with suspicion, necessity had forced a grudging acceptance of her presence. She needed supplies, and Henderson needed customers. The store was busier than usual this morning. Several ranchers had come to town for provisions, their spurs jingling against the floorboards as they moved between the shelves. Faith navigated toward the back where Henderson kept the paper and ink she'd ordered from Denver. Miss O'Malley. The voice was deep, unfamiliar. Faith turned to find a man she hadn't seen before, tall, weathered by sun and wind, with dark hair that needed cutting and eyes the color of winter sky. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, worn denim, leather chaps, and a blue shirt that had seen better days. But there was something in his bearing that set him apart from the typical ranch hands who frequented the store. Yes, she kept her tone neutral, having learned that friendliness was often misconstrued in a town where her very presence was considered scandalous. He touched the brim of his hat. "Sam Garrett, ma'am. Just started as foreman out at the Barlow Ranch. Heard you were setting up a newspaper." Faith tensed, waiting for the criticism that usually followed such observations. "That's correct, Mr. Garrett." "Good thing, I'd say. Town this size needs a paper. Keep folks informed about what's happening beyond their front doors." He selected a tin of coffee from the shelf, examining it with the careful consideration of a man who spent his own wages. "My mother ran a small press back in Colorado. Published poetry, mostly, but some news when it mattered." Faith blinked, surprised. "Your mother was a publisher." A slight smile creased the corners of his eyes. "Among other things, raised 4 boys on her own after my father died in a mining accident. The press kept food on our table when times were lean." He set the coffee in his basket. "Takes courage to run a paper. Takes more courage to do it alone in a place that doesn't want you to succeed." Before Faith could respond, a commotion arose near the store entrance. Reverend Hathaway swept in, his black coat billowing behind him like storm clouds. His gaze found Faith immediately, and his face darkened. "Miss O'Malley," he said loudly, ensuring everyone in the store could hear. "I had hoped you would have reconsidered your unfortunate decision by now. Yet I see you persist in this unseemly endeavor." Faith lifted her chin. "I'm simply shopping for supplies, Reverend, as is my right." "Rights," Hathaway's voice rose. "You speak of rights when you flaunt every convention of decent society. You are a shame to this town, Miss O'Malley, a walking scandal that corrupts our young women with dangerous notions of independence." The store had gone silent, all eyes fixed on the confrontation. Faith felt heat rise in her cheeks, but forced herself to remain calm. "I fail to see how honest work corrupts anyone, Reverend." "Honest work." Hathaway stepped closer, and Faith caught the scent of pomade and righteousness. "A woman's honest work is in the home, in service to her husband and children, not in pursuing masculine ambitions that upset the natural order ordained by the Almighty." "Seems to me," Sam Garrett said quietly, stepping beside Faith, "that information is as valuable as water in country like this. Don't matter much who provides it, long as it's clean and true." Hathaway's attention snapped to the cowboy. "And who might you be to speak on matters of propriety?" "Sam Garrett, new foreman at Barlow's place." Sam's tone remained conversational, but Faith noticed his stance had shifted subtly, balanced and ready. "And I was raised to believe the Almighty judges folks by their hearts and deeds, not by whether they wear trousers or skirts." A murmur ran through the store. Faith glanced around, noting the expressions on the faces of the other shoppers. Some seemed shocked by Sam's defense, others thoughtful. Mrs. Patterson, the blacksmith's wife, was watching with particular interest. "You would do well to learn the ways of this town before aligning yourself with unsuitable persons," Hathaway warned, his voice dropping to a threatening register. "Mr. Barlow is a God-fearing man. I doubt he would appreciate his foreman associating with such elements. I reckon Mr. Barlow hired me to manage his cattle and his men. Sam replied evenly. Not to police who shops in the general store, ma'am. He touched his hat to Faith again. Don't let me keep you from your business. Reverend, I believe Mrs. Henderson was looking for you. Something about the church social preparations. It was a clear dismissal, delivered with such calm authority that Hathaway found himself taking a step back. The Reverend's face flushed deep red, but with the entire store watching, he had little choice but to maintain his dignity. He gave Faith one last glare that promised future retribution, then stalked toward the counter where Mrs. Henderson waited nervously. Thank you, Faith said quietly when Hathaway was out of earshot. Though I'm capable of fighting my own battles. No doubt about that, Sam agreed, picking up a sack of flour. But sometimes it doesn't hurt to have someone watching your back, especially when the opposition fights dirty. What makes you think he fights dirty? Sam's expression grew serious. Man like that, so concerned with controlling others, he's got something to protect. In my experience, folks who shout loudest about morality are often hiding the biggest sins. He paused, studying her. You planning to write about the railroad camps? The question surprised her. Why do you ask? Passed through them on my way here. Conditions are rough. Men dying from accidents that could be prevented. Wages that don't match the danger. Someone should tell those stories. Faith felt a spark of excitement. You'd be willing to talk about what you saw. If it helps those men, yes. He shifted his purchases. I'll be in town Saturday afternoon. Could stop by your office if you'd like. I'd appreciate that. Mr. Garrett. He started to move away, then turned back. Sam. Just Sam is fine. And Miss O'Malley, don't let them run you off. This town needs shaking up, even if it doesn't know it yet. He left her standing in the aisle, processing the unexpected encounter. For 3 weeks, she'd faced nothing but hostility or cold indifference from Promise Creek's residents. To find an ally, and in such an unlikely form, felt like discovering water in the desert. That was quite something, a voice said beside her. Faith turned to find Mrs. Patterson holding a bolt of calico. Not many would stand up to the Reverend like that. No, Faith agreed carefully, unsure of the woman's intentions. Mrs. Patterson glanced around, then leaned closer. My husband says I shouldn't speak to you. Says it's not proper. She straightened, a defiant glint in her eye. But I've been reading the Denver papers when they come through. Read about women doctors and lawyers back east. Even heard tell of women voting in Wyoming territory. She paused. Maybe it's time Promise Creek caught up with the rest of the world. Before Faith could respond, Mrs. Patterson moved away, but not before giving her a small, conspiratorial smile. Faith stood frozen for a moment, then quickly gathered her supplies, her mind racing. Perhaps she wasn't as alone as she'd thought. Perhaps there were others in Promise Creek who yearned for change but hadn't found their voices yet. At the counter, Mr. Henderson tallied her purchases with obvious reluctance, his eyes darting between her and Reverend Hathaway, who lingered near the door like a crow waiting for carrion. Faith paid without comment, gathered her parcels, and walked out with her head high. The afternoon sun beat down on the dusty street as she made her way back to her office. Through the window, she could see the printing press that had arrived just yesterday, still wrapped in protective covering. Tomorrow, she would begin setting it up. Soon after, the first issue of the Promise Creek Herald would give voice to stories that needed telling. As she unlocked her door, Faith caught a glimpse of Sam Garrett loading supplies onto a wagon outside the feed store. He looked up, caught her eye, and touched his hat brim once more. It was a simple gesture, but it felt like a promise she wasn't alone in this fight. Inside her office, Faith set down her parcels and moved to the desk where she'd been drafting editorial ideas. She picked up her pen and added a new item to the list. Interview S. Garrett re-railroad camp conditions. Change was coming to Promise Creek, whether Reverend Hathaway liked it or not. and Faith O'Malley intended to document every moment of it. Saturday afternoon arrived with a dust storm that turned the sky yellow-brown and sent tumbleweeds racing down Promise Creek's Main Street. Faith had spent the morning wrestling with her printing press, learning its quirks and temperament. Her hands were stained with ink, and a smudge decorated her left cheek. But she'd successfully printed a test page, the first real step toward her newspaper. A knock at the door interrupted her contemplation of font choices. Through the window, she could see Sam Garrett brushing dust from his coat, a leather satchel slung over one shoulder. "Come in," she called, wiping her hands on her work apron. "Though I'm afraid I'm not much to look at right now." Sam entered, removing his hat. His eyes took in the organized chaos of the newspaper office typecases lined against one wall, paper stacked on shelves, the massive printing press dominating the center of the room. "Looks like you've been working hard. That's a Colombian press, isn't it?" "You know printing presses?" Faith asked, surprised again by this cowboy who defied expectations. "My mother's was smaller, a Washington hand press, but I spent enough time helping her to recognize good equipment." He ran an appreciative hand along the press's frame. "This is a beauty. Should serve you well." Faith found herself smiling. "Would you like some coffee? I just made a fresh pot." "That would be welcome." "Thank you." She led him to the back room that served as both her living quarters and a makeshift kitchen. The space was cramped but clean, with her few possessions arranged neatly. She poured coffee into 2 cups, noting how Sam took in the sparse surroundings without comment or judgment. "You mentioned the railroad camps," she said, handing him a cup. "I've heard rumors about the conditions, but getting first-hand accounts has proven difficult." Sam settled into the wooden chair she offered, his large frame making it creak. "Men are scared to talk. Company has ways of making troublemakers disappear, not killing them, mind you, but blacklisting them so they can't find work anywhere on the line. For men with families to feed, that's as good as a death sentence." Faith pulled out her notebook. "What did you see specifically?" For the next hour, Sam painted a picture of life in the railroad camps that made Faith's stomach turn. Men working 16-hour days in dangerous conditions, sleeping in tents that offered little protection from the elements, eating food that was often spoiled. The company store charged prices that kept workers perpetually in debt, and any complaint resulted in immediate termination. "Worst part is the accidents," Sam said, his voice heavy. "Saw a man lose his hand to a rail spike that wouldn't have happened if they'd had proper safety equipment. Company gave him 2 days' pay and sent him on his way. How's a man supposed to support his family with one hand and no job?" Faith's pen flew across the page, capturing every detail. "Would any of these men be willing to speak to me directly?" "Doubtful. A woman showing up in the camps asking questions would draw too much attention." Sam paused, seeming to wrestle with something. "But I might know someone who could help. Tom Chen works as a cook in the camps. He speaks good English, keeps his eyes open. The bosses don't pay much attention to the Chinese workers. Figure they don't understand enough to matter." "Would he talk to me?" "Maybe, if I vouched for you." Sam set down his empty cup. "But you need to understand the risk. The railroad company has deep pockets and long arms. They won't take kindly to someone exposing their practices." "Neither did Reverend Hathaway, but I'm still here." A slight smile crossed Sam's weathered features. "That you are, though comparing Hathaway to the railroad bosses is like comparing a house cat to a mountain lion. Both have claws, but one's a lot more likely to use them." Faith leaned back in her chair, studying this unusual man. "Why do you care? Most people would keep their heads down, do their job, and stay out of trouble." Sam was quiet for a long moment, staring into his empty coffee cup. "My father died in a mining accident when I was 12. Cave-in that could have been prevented if the company had shored up the tunnels properly. My mother tried to get justice, wrote letters to newspapers, mining officials, anyone who would listen. Most ignored her, but one editor in Denver published her story, and it led to an investigation. Didn't bring my father back, but it might have saved other men." I'm sorry about your father. Long time ago now, but I learned something from watching my mother fight that battle. Sometimes the only thing standing between powerful men and the harm they do is someone willing to tell the truth. He stood, settling his hat back on his head. I'll talk to Tom Chen. If he agrees, I'll send word. Faith walked him to the door, acutely aware of how his presence filled the small space. Sam, why trust me? You barely know me. He paused in the doorway, considering. Saw you stand up to Hathaway in Henderson's store. Takes spine to do that when the whole town's against you. Besides, he gestured to the printing press. You're not playing at this. You're serious about making a difference. After he left, Faith stood in her empty office, processing the conversation. She'd expected to find sources for her railroad story eventually, but she hadn't expected to find an ally like Sam Garrett. There was something solid about him, a quiet strength that reminded her of the mountains she'd seen on her journey west. A commotion outside drew her attention. Through the window, she saw Reverend Hathaway speaking animatedly with several men. Gesturing toward her office, Faith recognized Jake Morrison, who owned the lumber yard, and Carl Daniels, a prominent rancher. Neither looked pleased. The group dispersed, but not before Hathaway caught her watching. His expression promised trouble. Faith turned away from the window, refusing to be intimidated. She had work to do. That evening, as she practiced setting type for her first editorial, another knock came at her door. This time, it was Mrs. Patterson, glancing nervously over her shoulder. I'm sorry to bother you so late, the blacksmith's wife said. But I wanted to warn you, Reverend Hathaway's been making rounds, talking to business owners about refusing to advertise in your paper. He's also suggesting they refuse to sell to you. Faith's heart sank. Without advertising revenue and access to supplies, her newspaper would die before it truly lived. Thank you for warning me. Mrs. Patterson shifted uncomfortably. There's more. I overheard him talking to my husband. He mentioned something about the building owner, Mr. Martin. Said it would be a shame if certain information about Martin's past became public knowledge. He's trying to get me evicted. Seems likely. The Reverend has ways of knowing things about people, things they'd rather keep quiet. Mrs. Patterson pulled her shawl tighter. I should go, if my husband knew I was here. I understand. Thank you. Mrs. Patterson. It took courage to come here. The woman paused at the threshold. My given name is Mary, and Miss O'Malley. Some of us are watching. We may not speak up yet, but we see what you're trying to do. Don't give up. Alone again. Faith sank into her desk chair. The walls seemed to be closing in already, and she hadn't even published her first issue. But as she looked at the test page, she'd printed her newspaper's name in bold letters across the top. She felt her resolve strengthen. She pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and began writing a letter to her mentor in Boston, requesting a loan. If Hathaway thought he could strangle her newspaper in its cradle by cutting off local support, he'd learn otherwise. She had connections in Denver, too, suppliers who cared more about money than small-town politics. Near midnight, she made a decision. Walking to the back room, she retrieved the small derringer her uncle had insisted she carry west. She'd hoped never to need it, but if Hathaway was escalating his campaign against her, she needed to be prepared for anything. Through her small window, she could see lights burning in the Barlow Ranch bunkhouse in the distance. Somewhere out there. Sam Garrett was probably settling in for the night, unaware of how much his simple support had meant to her today. For the first time since arriving in Promise Creek, Faith didn't feel entirely alone. Tomorrow, she would visit Mr. Martin and try to shore up her position. She would also begin reaching out to potential advertisers who might be less susceptible to Hathaway's influence. The battle for Promise Creek's soul was just beginning, and Faith O'Malley intended to win it, one printed word at a time. The move to Barlow Ranch happened faster than Faith had anticipated. 2 days after Mrs. Patterson's warning, Mr. Martin had arrived at her office, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool morning air. "Miss O'Malley," he'd said, unable to meet her eyes. "I'm afraid I need to terminate your lease. Family emergency, back east. Need to sell the building quickly." Faith had known it was a lie, could see it in the way his hands trembled as he held out her rent money. But arguing would have been pointless. Hathaway had made his move, and Martin had folded like a weak hand of cards. Now, as Sam Garrett helped her load the last of her printing equipment onto a borrowed wagon, Faith tried to push down the mix of gratitude and humiliation churning in her stomach. When Sam had heard about her eviction, he'd ridden straight to Henry Barlow's ranch house. An hour later, he'd returned with an offer, a small outbuilding on ranch property that had once served as a schoolhouse for the ranch children, before they'd grown and moved away. "It's not charity," Sam assured her as they secured the printing press for transport. "Mr. Barlow's been wanting a way to document the ranch's operations, maybe print up some bills of sale and breeding records. Having a press on the property suits his purposes." Faith suspected there was more kindness than business sense in the offer, but she wasn't in a position to refuse. "I suppose Reverend Hathaway won't be pleased about this arrangement." "Reverend Hathaway doesn't run Barlow Ranch," Sam said firmly. "And Mr. Barlow's been in Wyoming longer than most. He's got his own ideas about right and wrong." The journey to the ranch took 2 hours over rutted roads. Faith rode on the wagon seat beside Sam, acutely aware of how this would look to the townspeople, an unmarried woman riding alone with a man. But her reputation was already in tatters. A little more scandal hardly mattered. The Barlow Ranch spread out before them like a small kingdom, neat corrals, well-maintained buildings, and cattle dotting the hills as far as the eye could see. The main house stood proud on a small rise, painted white with green shutters. Sam directed the wagon toward a cluster of smaller buildings near the main barn. "There," he pointed to a sturdy structure with windows on all sides. "Old schoolhouse. Been empty for 3 years now, but the roof's sound and there's a good stove." As they pulled up, several ranch hands emerged from the barn to help unload. Faith noticed their curious glances, but also something else, a lack of the judgment she'd grown accustomed to in town. These men seemed more interested in the printing press than in scandalizing over her presence. "Boys," Sam addressed them, "Miss O'Malley will be setting up her newspaper here. I expect you all to be respectful and helpful if she needs anything." A chorus of "yes, sir" and hat-tipping followed. One young cowboy, barely out of his teens, stepped forward eagerly. "That's a real printing press. Ma'am makes newspapers and such." "Indeed it is," Faith replied, warming to his enthusiasm. "Perhaps once I'm set up, I could show you how it works." The boy's face lit up. "I'd like that powerful much, ma'am. Name's Johnny Summers. I can read real good, my ma taught me before she passed." As the men worked to move her equipment inside, Faith explored her new quarters. The schoolhouse was larger than her town office had been, with a small attached room that must have served as the teachers' quarters. Everything was dusty but solid. An afternoon light flooded through the windows. "This is more than adequate," she told Sam. "Please express my gratitude to Mr. Barlow." "Express it yourself," Sam replied, nodding toward the door. "Here he comes now." Henry Barlow was not what Faith had expected. Instead of the imposing cattle baron she'd imagined, he was a compact man in his 60s with kind eyes and work-worn hands. He walked with a slight limp, leaning on a carved walking stick. "Miss O'Malley," he said, extending his hand as if she were a man, a gesture that surprised and touched her. "Welcome to Barlow Ranch. Sam here tells me you're planning to shake up Promise Creek with honest reporting." "I intend to try, Mr. Barlow." "Good. Town's gotten too comfortable with the way things are. Too much power in too few hands." He looked around the old schoolhouse with nostalgic eyes. "My Mary taught the local children here for near 20 years. She'd be pleased to see it used for education again, even if it's a different sort." "Your wife was a teacher." "Among other things, like you. She believed in the power of words to change minds." His expression grew distant. Lost her to fever 5 winters back. Still miss her voice filling this place with lessons and laughter. Faith felt a connection to this man who'd loved a woman of letters. "I'll take good care of the building, sir." "I know you will." Barlow turned to practical matters. "Now, you'll take your meals with the hands in the cookhouse. No argument on that. Rosita would skin me alive if she thought we had a lady on the property not eating proper. There's a well out back for water, and the boys will keep your wood box filled." Mr. Barlow, I need to pay rent." He waved her off. "We'll work that out once you're settled. Maybe some printing work for the ranch, like Sam suggested. For now, just get your paper running. From what Sam tells me about those railroad camps, there are stories that need telling." As Barlow headed back to the main house, Faith turned to find the ranch hands had nearly finished unloading her belongings. The printing press stood in the center of the main room, looking oddly at home in the former schoolhouse. "Thank you," she said to Sam, who was directing the placement of her type cases. "I know you arranged this." "Just mention to Mr. Barlow that good neighbors look out for each other. He did the rest." Sam paused, then added quietly, "Tom Chen agreed to meet with you. He'll be in town Saturday night, after the camp bosses have been drinking. Safer that way." That evening, Faith joined the ranch hands for dinner in the cookhouse, a long building filled with rough tables and benches. She was the only woman among 20 men, but Rosita, the ranch cook, had apparently laid down the law. The men were polite, even friendly, including her in their conversation about range conditions and horse breeding. "You really gonna write about the railroad camps?" asked an older hand named Walter. "My nephew works there, says it's brutal." "I plan to, if I can get enough information," Faith replied. "Good," Walter said firmly. "Someone needs to. Those company men treat workers like they're disposable." After dinner, Sam walked her back to the schoolhouse. The stars were beginning to emerge in the darkening sky, and the air carried the scent of sage and cattle. "This is different from what you expected, I imagine," he said. Faith laughed softly. "Nothing about Promise Creek has been what I expected, though this," she gestured to the peaceful ranch setting, "is certainly better than being run out of town entirely." "Hathaway won't give up easily. He'll see this as a challenge to his authority. Then he'll have to get used to being challenged." Faith paused at her door. "Sam, why are you helping me, really?" He was quiet for a moment, looking out over the darkened range. "Maybe because I've been the outsider too. Came here with nothing but my horse and my reputation. Mr. Barlow gave me a chance when others might not have. Seems only right to pass that on." "There's more to it than that." He met her eyes then, and something passed between them, an understanding, perhaps, or the beginning of one. "Maybe there is. Good night, Miss O'Malley." "Faith," she said impulsively. "If we're to be neighbors, you should call me Faith." He smiled, the expression transforming his weathered features. "Good night, Faith." Inside the schoolhouse, Faith lit her lamps and surveyed her new domain. Tomorrow, she would finish setting up the press and begin work on her first real issue. She had a safe haven now, unexpected allies, and stories waiting to be told. Through her window, she could see lights in the bunkhouse where the hands were settling in for the night. For the first time since leaving Boston, she felt part of something larger than herself, not just an observer recording events, but a member of a community, even if it wasn't the community she'd originally chosen. At her small desk, Mrs. Barlow's old teaching desk, she realized Faith began drafting her first editorial. It would be about the nature of neighbors, about how kindness could flourish in unexpected places, about the courage it took to stand up for what was right. She thought of Henry Barlow, honoring his late wife's memory by sheltering another woman of words. She thought of Sam Garrett, quietly arranging help without seeking credit. She thought of Johnny Summers, eager to learn about the printing press, and Walter, worried about his nephew in the camps. These were her people now, her community, And their stories, all their stories, deserve to be told. The first issue of the Promise Creek Herald came off the press on a crisp October morning, the ink still damp and smelling of possibility. Faith held the paper up to the light streaming through the schoolhouse windows, her heart racing as she read her own words in print. The headline stretched across the top in bold letters, "Railroad Camps Where Men Die for Progress." Below it, her investigation into the working conditions laid out facts that would shock any reader with a conscience. Tom Chen had been a valuable source, providing details about injury rates, wage theft, and the company store's exploitative prices. Johnny Summers, who'd become her unofficial assistant, whistled low. "Miss Faith, this is really something. Folk in town need to read this." "That's the plan," Faith said, stacking the papers carefully. "We'll take 50 copies into town today. See if Henderson will stock them. The rest we'll distribute around the ranch and nearby homesteads." Sam appeared in the doorway, having heard the press running. His eyes scanned the front page, and a slow smile spread across his face. "You didn't pull any punches." "The truth rarely does," Faith replied. "Are you ready for the reaction this will cause? Question is, are you—" Faith thought of the late nights spent verifying facts, the careful documentation of every claim. "I've never been more ready for anything in my life." The ride into Promise Creek felt different this time. Faith sat straighter on the wagon seat, boxes of newspapers secured behind her. Sam had insisted on accompanying her, bringing along 2 other ranch hands, just in case there's trouble. They reached Henderson's store first. The proprietor's face went pale as he read the headline. "Miss O'Malley. I can't stock this. Reverend Hathaway would—" "Would what?" Faith challenged. "Tell people not to shop here. He's already doing that to anyone who supports me, at least with these papers. You'd be standing for something." "Mrs." Henderson appeared from the back room, drawn by the conversation. She took one of the papers, her eyes widening as she read. "My lord," she whispered, "is this true about the men dying from preventable accidents?" "Every word can be verified," Faith assured her. "I have signed statements, witnesses. We'll take 20 copies." "Mrs.," Henderson said firmly, ignoring her husband's sputtered protests. "On consignment. If they sell, we'll pay you. If not—" She shrugged, but there was steel in her expression. Word spread quickly. By the time Faith and Sam reached the second stop, Patterson's blacksmith shop, a crowd had gathered. Some faces showed curiosity, others anger. Reverend Hathaway stood at the center, a copy of the Herald clutched in his fist. "This," he declared to his audience, "is exactly what I warned you about. This woman seeks to sow discord, to turn workers against their employers, to upset the natural order that keeps our community stable." "Since when is reporting the truth discord?" Faith asked, stepping down from the wagon. The crowd parted, creating a path between her and the Reverend. "Truth." Hathaway's face flushed red. "You call these inflammatory accusations truth. You're nothing but a troublemaker. A shame to this town." "The only shame," a new voice said, "is that it took an outsider to care about those men dying in the camps." Everyone turned to see Mary Patterson standing in the doorway of the blacksmith shop, her husband behind her looking stunned. She held a copy of the Herald. "My cousin's boy works those camps. Everything Miss O'Malley wrote matches what he's told us in letters. Men crushed by rails, infected wounds with no doctor, children going hungry because the company store takes all the wages." A murmur ran through the crowd. Faith noticed several people nodding, recognition in their eyes. These townspeople had relatives in the camps too. "Mrs. Patterson," Hathaway's voice turned cold, "you forget yourself." "No, Reverend." Mary Patterson lifted her chin. "I'm remembering myself. Remembering that Christian charity means caring for the least fortunate, not ignoring their suffering." Sam stepped closer to Faith as the crowd's energy shifted. She could feel the tension crackling like lightning before a storm. Then Henry Barlow's voice cut through the noise. The rancher had arrived on horseback, accompanied by several of his men. "Folks," he said calmly, "I've read Miss O'Malley's paper, found it enlightening. In fact, I'm buying advertising space in the next issue for Barlow Ranch." The statement hit like a thunderbolt. Barlow was the largest employer in the area after the railroad. His support meant legitimacy. "Mr. Barlow," Hathaway spluttered, "surely you can't endorse this? This what? Reverend Free Press truth-telling last I checked. Those were American values." Barlow's mild tone carried an edge. "Unless you have evidence that Miss O'Malley's reporting is false." Hathaway's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. Around him, the crowd was fragmenting. Some still stood with the Reverend, but others were drifting away, papers in hand, reading with furrowed brows. "Furthermore," Barlow continued, "I find it interesting that you're so concerned about workers being turned against employers. The Barlow Ranch has no trouble with our hands because we treat them fair. Maybe the railroad should try the same instead of silencing those who point out their failures." "You'll regret this," Hathaway said, his voice low and venomous. "All of you who stand with her. This town has thrived under proper leadership." "Your leadership," Sam interrupted. "Or the leadership of those who line your pockets." The accusation hung in the air. Faith saw something flicker in Hathaway's eyes, fear. "How dare you?" "I dare because it's true," Sam said calmly. "Folks might be interested to know about your financial connections to the railroad company, about the shares you hold through that trust in Denver." Faith's breath caught. She had known Sam had this information. Around them, the crowd had gone silent, absorbing this revelation. Hathaway's face went from red to white. "You can't prove anything." "Maybe not today," Sam agreed. "But I bet a good newspaper editor could find out more. The kind of editor who's not afraid to dig for the truth." The Reverend looked around at the crowd, seeing the doubt in faces that had once shown only deference. Without another word, he turned and strode away, his remaining supporters trailing behind. In the aftermath, people approached Faith hesitantly. Some bought papers. Others asked questions about the railroad investigation. Mrs. Anderson, the banker's wife who'd snubbed her that first day, surprised everyone by purchasing 5 copies to send to relatives in Denver. As the crowd dispersed, Faith found herself momentarily alone with Sam. "How did you know about Hathaway's railroad shares?" "Tom Chen isn't the only one who keeps his ears open," Sam said. "Figured that information might come in handy someday. Today seemed like the right time." "Thank you," Faith said softly, "for everything." "You're the one who wrote the story, printed the paper, faced down the Reverend. I just provided a little support." "Sometimes," Faith said, watching townspeople walk away reading her newspaper. "Support makes all the difference." Back at the ranch that evening, there was a celebration atmosphere in the cookhouse. Word of the confrontation in town had spread, embellished with each telling. Johnny Summers was particularly animated, describing Faith as standing tall as a mountain against that preacher. "Wasn't just me," Faith protested. "Mrs. Patterson, Mr. Barlow, Sam." "But you started it?" Walter insisted. "You gave folks something to rally around. That takes courage." After dinner, Faith returned to the schoolhouse to find a surprise. Someone had left a bouquet of late wildflowers on her doorstep, along with an anonymous note. "Thank you for caring about our men. A railroad wife." She carried the flowers inside, placing them in a mason jar on her desk. As she prepared the next issue's layout, she thought about the day's events. She'd expected resistance, even hostility, but she hadn't expected allies to emerge from unexpected corners, hadn't expected the town's carefully maintained facade to crack so quickly. Through her window, she could see Sam making his evening rounds, checking on the horses. He paused, looking toward the schoolhouse, and raised his hand in greeting. Faith waved back, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the stove. The Promise Creek Herald had found its voice. More importantly, It had given voice to those who'd been silenced. Reverend Hathaway might call her a shame to the town, but tonight, surrounded by newspapers and wildflowers and the quiet support of good people, Faith O'Malley felt like she might just be its salvation. Faith woke to the sound of breaking glass. She bolted upright in the narrow bed, heart pounding, as another crash echoed through the schoolhouse, in the pale moonlight streaming through the windows. She could see her printing press, or what was left of it. The beautiful Columbian press lay on its side, type scattered across the floor like fallen soldiers. The windows facing town were shattered, October wind whistling through the gaps. And across the wall, in dripping red paint, someone had written a single word, sinner. Faith's legs trembled as she stood, bare feet crunching on broken glass. She grabbed her shawl and stumbled toward the door, only to find it hanging off its hinges. The destruction was thorough. Deliberate, not just vandalism, but a message. Faith, Sam's voice cut through the night. He appeared in the doorway, rifle in hand, several ranch hands behind him with lanterns. The horror on his face as the lamplight revealed the damage made her knees buckle. "Oh, darling," he breathed, catching her before she fell. "I'm so sorry. We heard the commotion from the bunkhouse." That's when the tears came. Not gentle tears, but great, gulping sobs that shook her whole body. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd built, lay in ruins around her. The press that had been her uncle's last gift, the type she'd carefully arranged, the papers ready for distribution all destroyed. Sam held her as she cried, his arms strong and steady around her shaking frame. She was dimly aware of the other men moving around them. Johnny Summers cursing with vocabulary she hadn't known he possessed. Walter directing others to secure the building. "We'll fix this," Sam murmured against her hair. "I promise you, we'll fix this." But how could they? The press was beyond repair. The typecases smashed, her carefully collected notes and interviews scattered to the wind. Months of work, destroyed in minutes by cowards in the night. "Miss Faith," Henry Barlow's voice, thick with sleep and anger. The ranch owner stood in the doorway, still in his nightclothes with a coat thrown over, his face grim as he surveyed the damage. "Johnny, ride to town immediately. Fetch Sheriff Morrison. Tell him if he values his position. He'll be here before dawn." "Sheriff's probably in on it," someone muttered. "Maybe so," Barlow said coldly. "But he'll answer to me either way." He moved carefully through the debris to where Faith still stood in Sam's embrace. "Miss O'Malley, you'll stay in the main house tonight. Maria will prepare a room." Faith pulled away from Sam, wiping her tears with shaking hands. "My press. It was my uncle's. And we'll see about getting it repaired or replaced," Barlow said firmly. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." As the men worked to secure the building and gather what could be salvaged, Faith noticed something half buried in the debris, the wildflowers from the railroad wife, their jar miraculously unbroken. She picked them up with trembling hands, clinging to this small symbol of support. Mary Patterson arrived before the sheriff, still in her nightgown with a coat thrown over, her husband trailing behind, looking bewildered. "I saw riders heading out here fast," she explained breathlessly. "Oh, Faith, oh no!" The blacksmith's wife took in the destruction with growing fury. "This is Hathaway's doing. Has to be, after what happened in town today." "We don't know that," her husband warned. "Don't we?" Mary whirled on him. "Who else would write that word? Who else has been calling her such things?" She turned back to Faith. "You're not alone in this. There are more of us than you know. Women who've been waiting for someone to speak the truth." Sheriff Morrison finally arrived as dawn was breaking, looking deeply uncomfortable. He made a show of examining the scene, asking perfunctory questions, but Faith could see in his eyes that no real investigation would happen. "Probably drifters," he concluded weakly. "Saw an opportunity for mischief. Drifters who just happened to know exactly which building to target." Sam's voice was dangerously quiet. "Who just happened to paint the same word the Reverend's been using?" The sheriff shifted uneasily. Now, Sam, we can't go making accusations without proof. The proof is all around us, Barlow interrupted. And if you won't do your job, Sheriff, perhaps it's time Promise Creek found someone who will. It was a threat, delivered with the calm certainty of a man who had the power to follow through. Morrison paled. I'll investigate thoroughly. Mr. Barlow, you have my word. Your word, Barlow said flatly, isn't worth the paper it would be printed on. If Miss O'Malley's press was still functioning, that is, as the sun rose higher, more people arrived. Mrs. Anderson in her fancy carriage, several ranch families from outlying homesteads, even Tom Chen, who'd risked leaving the railroad camp to offer support. They stood in the schoolhouse, witnessing the destruction, and Faith saw anger building in their faces. This is what happens, she said quietly, finding her voice at last. When you threaten powerful people with the truth, they try to silence you. Then we'll help you speak louder. Mary Patterson declared, My husband has metalworking tools. We can try to repair the press. I know a man in Cheyenne sells printing equipment. One of the ranchers offered, fair prices too. The railroad workers are taking up a collection. Tom Chen added quietly, many small coins, but they add up. The men want the stories told. Faith felt fresh tears threaten, but these were different tears of gratitude rather than despair. I don't know what to say. Say you won't give up, Mrs. Anderson said firmly. Say you'll keep fighting, because if they can do this to you, none of us are safe from those who think they own this town. Sam stepped forward, glass crunching under his boots. There's something else folks should know. Found these near the side door. He held up several cigarette stubs. Turkish tobacco. Expensive. Kind Reverend Hathaway favors. A murmur ran through the crowd. It wasn't proof that would hold up in court, but in the court of public opinion, it was damning. I'll have that sent to the newspaper in Cheyenne. Someone said, let them know what happened here. Maybe they'll pick up the story. And I'll write to the territorial governor, Barlow added. He should know what kind of justice exists in Promise Creek. As the crowd slowly dispersed, making plans and promises of help, Faith stood in the wreckage of her dream. The press lay broken, but something else was building a community, united not by fear of change, but by hunger for it. You need rest, Sam said gently. Come on, Maria's making breakfast up at the house. Faith allowed him to lead her away, but not before taking one last look at the damaged schoolhouse. The painted word sinner seemed smaller now, less powerful in the morning light. They meant to break me, she said softly. Did they succeed? Sam asked. Faith thought of Mary Patterson's fierce support, of railroad workers contributing their meager coins, of ranchers offering help. She thought of the wildflowers, still blooming despite everything. No, she said, straightening her shoulders. They just made me angry, and they made me less alone. Sam squeezed her hand, a gesture of support that sent warmth through her entire body. That's my girl, he said quietly, then seemed to catch himself. I know what you mean, Faith said, holding tight to his hand as they walked toward the main house. And Sam, when we rebuild, and we will rebuild, the first story I print will be about what happened here, about how some people think violence can silence truth. They're about to learn how wrong they are. Behind them, the sun climbed higher, burning away the shadows and illuminating the truth written in broken glass and spilled ink. The Promise Creek Herald was down, but far from defeated, and Faith O'Malley, whom the preacher called a shame to the town, had become instead its conscience and its courage. 2 weeks had passed since the attack on the newspaper office. The schoolhouse stood repaired, its windows replaced by the combined efforts of the ranch hands and townspeople who'd rallied to Faith's cause. Inside, Mary Patterson's husband worked with Sam to reassemble what remained of the printing press, though it was clear a replacement would be needed. Faith had thrown herself into documenting everything: the attack, the response, The growing divide in Promise Creek between those who supported change and those who clung to Hathaway's version of order. She wrote by lamplight, using the small desk in the main house room that Maria Barlow had insisted she occupy until things were safe. This evening was different. Henry Barlow had discovered something, an old printing press stored in his late wife's family property in Colorado. "It's yours if you want it," he'd told Faith. Mary would have wanted it used for something meaningful. Now Faith sat at the kitchen table with Sam, planning the journey to retrieve it. The ranch foreman had volunteered to make the trip, insisting it was too dangerous for her to go alone. 3 days there, 3 days back, Sam calculated, marking routes on a worn map. "We'll take the northern route through Cheyenne, safer than the mountain passes this time of year." Faith watched his hands as he traced the paths, noticed the careful way he considered each option. Over the past weeks, she'd grown accustomed to his presence, the quiet strength he brought to every situation, the way he listened when she needed to talk through her frustration and plans. "I should go with you," she said. "It's my press." "It's also your safety I'm thinking about," Sam interrupted gently. "Hathaway's been too quiet since the attack. Makes me nervous. Better you stay here where Barlow and the boys can keep watch." She wanted to argue, but knew he was right. 3 men had been spotted watching the ranch from the hills they'd disappeared when confronted, but the threat remained. "Besides," Sam continued with a slight smile, "someone needs to keep Johnny from getting too creative with the repairs. Boy's got enthusiasm, but not much experience." Faith laughed despite her worry. Johnny had indeed been eager to help, though his attempts at sorting type had resulted in some interesting spelling combinations. A knock at the door interrupted them. Maria Barlow entered, her usually stern face softer than normal. "There's something you should see," she said, beckoning them to follow. In the main house parlor, a surprising gathering had formed. Mary Patterson was there with several other women from town, including most shocking of all Mrs. Henderson and Mrs. Anderson. They sat in a circle, cups of tea cooling on the side tables, faces determined. "We've been talking," Mary began without preamble, "about what happened to your office, about what's been happening in this town for too long." Mrs. Anderson, her usual perfect composure slightly ruffled, spoke up. "My husband thinks I don't know about his business dealings, but I know he's been pressured by Reverend Hathaway to refuse credit to certain people. Good people who just want to build lives here. And my husband," Mrs. Henderson added, "has been forced to order goods from Hathaway's preferred suppliers, even when their prices are higher and quality lower. The Reverend has financial stakes we're only beginning to understand." Faith sank into an offered chair, overwhelmed. "Ladies, I appreciate your support, but—" "This isn't just about supporting you," Mary interrupted. "This is about our town, our families. We've been silent too long, letting men like Hathaway control everything while pretending it's God's will." Maria Barlow moved to stand behind Faith's chair. "My Mary always said that change comes when women decide they've had enough. Seems that time is now. We want to help." "Mrs. Henderson said firmly, "with money for the new press, with distribution, with information. We hear things our husbands think we don't understand. It's time someone did understand and acted on it." Sam stood quietly by the door, and Faith caught his eye. He gave her a small nod of encouragement. "What you're proposing could be dangerous," Faith warned. "Look what happened to my office. Which is exactly why we must act." Mrs. Anderson declared, "If we let violence silence truth, we're complicit in our own oppression." For the next hour, the women planned. They would create a network of information gatherers and supporters. Those whose husbands opposed the newspaper would find ways to help secretly. Money would be raised through church socials and quilting bees, innocent gatherings that would serve double purposes. As the meeting concluded and the women prepared to leave, Mary Patterson pulled Faith aside. "There's something else. My husband overheard talk at the saloon. Some of Hathaway's supporters are planning something for when Sam leaves for Colorado. You need to be careful." after the women left. Faith found Sam on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and crimson. "Quite a meeting," he said as she joined him. "I never expected, Mrs. Anderson barely acknowledged my existence before." "You gave them permission." Sam said simply, "By standing up first. You showed them it was possible. That's what leaders do." "I'm not a leader. I'm just a newspaper editor, or was before." She gestured toward the damaged schoolhouse. Sam turned to face her fully. "Faith, you're more than that. You're hope. You're change. You're—" He stopped, seeming to struggle with words. The air between them grew charged. Faith found herself leaning closer, drawn by something stronger than mere gratitude or friendship. Sam's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "When I come back from Colorado," he said softly, "with that press, we need to talk. About the future, about possibilities." "Sam." He leaned down and kissed her gentle at first, then deeper as she responded. It was a kiss that promised things neither dared speak aloud yet, not with danger still lurking and battles still to fight. But it was also hope, warm and real as the fading sunset. When they parted, Faith's heart was racing. "You'd better come back safely," she whispered. "Wild horses couldn't stop me," he promised. Then, lighter, "Though I might need that journal you've been writing in. Something to remember you by on the trail." Faith laughed, the tension breaking. "Absolutely not. Those are my private thoughts." "About the newspaper business, I'm sure," he teased, but his eyes were warm with understanding. That night, Faith helped prepare for Sam's departure. She packed food that would keep on the trail, wrote a letter of introduction to her uncle's lawyer in Denver in case Sam needed legal help, and tried not to think about the warnings Mary Patterson had shared. As she worked, Sam brought her something, a leather-bound journal, smaller than the one she used for newspaper notes. "For your private thoughts," he said, "the ones that aren't about newspaper business." She opened it to find an inscription on the first page. "For Faith who brings truth to the wilderness. Keep writing, keep fighting." Duh. "When did you—" "Had Johnny pick it up last time he was in town. Figured you'd need somewhere to put all those words while I'm gone." He paused, then added more seriously, "If anything happens while I'm away, send word to Cheyenne. I'll come back immediately." "Nothing will happen," Faith said firmly, trying to convince herself as much as him. "I have the ranch hands, Mr. Barlow, and now apparently half the women in Promise Creek watching out for me." "Still?" Sam pulled her close again, holding her as if memorizing the feeling. "Be careful. Hathaway's getting desperate, and desperate men do dangerous things." Early the next morning, Faith stood with the Barlows and ranch hands to see Sam off. He'd taken 2 men with him, insurance against trouble on the road. The wagon was loaded with supplies for the journey and equipment for transporting the press back. 6 days, he reminded Faith as he mounted his horse. "Keep Johnny out of trouble." "Keep yourself out of trouble," she countered, trying for lightness despite the knot of worry in her stomach. He touched his hat brim, that familiar gesture that had come to mean so much. Then he was gone. The wagon rolling down the dusty road toward Colorado and the promise of a new beginning for the Promise Creek Herald. Faith watched until they disappeared over a rise, then squared her shoulders and went to the schoolhouse. She had work to do, stories to write, a network of brave women to organize, and a revolution to nurture. In 6 days, God willing, she'd have a working press again. And when that happened, Promise Creek would hear truths that no amount of intimidation could silence. The telegram arrived on the 4th day, delivered by a dusty rider who'd pushed his horse hard from Cheyenne. Faith's hands shook as she read the brief message. "Sam injured. St. Mary's Hospital, Cheyenne. Come if possible. Dr. Marcus Ward." The world tilted. Faith gripped the porch railing of the main house, the telegram crumpling in her fist. Henry Barlow, who'd been discussing cattle prices with a buyer, immediately noticed her distress. "What is it?" he demanded, crossing to her in quick strides. Wordlessly, she handed him the message. His face darkened as he read. "Miguel," he shouted to one of his hands. "Saddle the fastest horses. We're riding to Cheyenne. Johnny, run to town and fetch Doc Pritchard. Tell him to follow as quick as he can." "I'm going with you," Faith said. Barlow didn't argue. Within 20 minutes, Faith found herself mounted on one of Barlow's best horses, riding hard toward Cheyenne with Barlow and 3 armed ranch hands. She'd never ridden such a distance, but desperation gave her strength. They pushed through the day and into the night, changing horses at way stations, stopping only when absolutely necessary. By dawn of the second day, Cheyenne's buildings appeared on the horizon. Faith's body ached. Her hands were blistered from the rains, but she urged her exhausted mount onward. The city was just awakening as they clattered through the streets to St. Mary's Hospital. The nurse at the entrance tried to stop Faith from rushing past, but Barlow's authoritative presence cleared the way. "Sam Garrett," Faith gasped. "Where is he?" "Room 12, the nurse replied, then called after them. "But he's in serious condition." Faith was already running down the corridor. She burst through the door to find Sam lying still in a narrow bed, his face pale and drawn, bandages wrapped around his chest and left shoulder. A man in a doctor's coat looked up from checking Sam's pulse. "You must be Miss O'Malley." "Doctor," Ward said. "He's been asking for you when he's conscious." "What happened?" Faith moved to Sam's bedside, taking his unbandaged hand in both of hers. It was too cold, too still. 3 men attacked him just outside the city, the doctor explained. Beat him severely, broke several ribs, dislocated his shoulder. He's lost a lot of blood from a knife wound to his side, if his companions hadn't fought them off. Faith felt rage building beneath her fear. Did they catch the men? 2 got away. The 3rd is in custody. "Doctor," Ward hesitated. "He claims someone in Promise Creek hired them. A man of the cloth, he says, though he won't give a name. Hathaway." Faith knew it with cold certainty. The Reverend had waited until Sam was away from the protection of the ranch to strike. Sam's eyes fluttered open, focusing slowly on her face. "Faith," his voice was barely a whisper. "I'm here." She squeezed his hand, fighting tears. "I'm right here." "The press, still at the freight office. Didn't want to lose it." "Forget the press," Faith said fiercely. "Just get better. That's all that matters." A weak smile crossed his lips. "Can't run a newspaper without a press. Besides, promised I'd bring it back." "Sam Garrett, if you think I care more about a printing press than about you," her voice broke. "Don't cry," he murmured. "Not worth your tears." "You're worth everything," she said, not caring that Barlow and the doctor could hear. "Do you understand me, everything?" Over the next 3 days, Faith barely left Sam's side. She helped the nurses change his bandages, spooned broth between his lips when he could manage it, and read to him from the book of poetry she found in his saddlebags, his mother's book. She realized, seeing the inscription. Barlow handled the practical matters. He hired guards for Sam's room, arranged for the printing press to be secured, and had long conversations with the local sheriff about the captured attacker. He also sent word back to Promise Creek, knowing the news would travel fast. On the 3rd night, Sam's fever broke. Faith had dozed off in the chair beside his bed, his hand still clasped in hers. She woke to find him watching her, his eyes clearer than they'd been since the attack. "You look terrible," he said, voice stronger. "You sweet talker," she replied, tears of relief streaming down her face. "That's no way to speak to a lady who rode 2 days straight to get here." "You rode from Promise Creek." "Mr. Barlow taught me on the way. Said I was a natural, though I think he was being kind. I'm going to be walking funny for a week." Sam's laugh turned into a wince as it pulled at his injuries. "Don't make me laugh. It hurts." Then don't scare me like that again. She leaned forward, pressing her forehead against their joined hands. When I got that telegram, Sam, I thought I'd lost you before we ever had a chance to what? His free hand came up to stroke her disheveled hair. To have that talk about the future, about possibilities. We can talk now. Faith lifted her head. You need to rest. I need to say this while I have the courage. Sam interrupted. Faith O'Malley, you rode into Promise Creek and turned everything upside down. You made me believe in things I'd stopped believing in: justice, truth, the power of one person to make a difference. And somewhere along the way, I fell in love with you. Faith's breath caught. Sam? I know it's not the romantic proposal a woman dreams of, lying here all bandaged up in a hospital bed. But when those men were beating me, all I could think was that I might die without telling you, without asking if maybe, once this mess with Hathaway is sorted out, you might consider. She silenced him with a kiss, gentle and careful of his injuries but full of promise. Yes, she whispered against his lips. Whatever you're asking, yes. You don't even know what I was going to say. Doesn't matter. If it involves you and me and a future together, the answer is yes. This time his smile was full and genuine. Marry me, Faith. Let me stand beside you while you change the world, one newspaper at a time. Only if you promise to stop getting yourself nearly killed defending my honor. Can't promise that, but I can promise to try to be more careful about it. A knock interrupted them. The sheriff entered with Barlow, his expression grim. Miss O'Malley. Mr. Garrett, the prisoner, finally gave us more details. Seems Reverend Hathaway didn't just want Mr. Garrett hurt, he wanted him delayed long enough for something to happen back in Promise Creek. The man mentioned something about clearing out the unwanted elements while the protection was gone. Faith's blood ran cold. The women who'd pledged to help her, the railroad workers who'd spoken out, they were all in danger. We need to get back, she said urgently. You're not going anywhere, Sam said, trying to sit up and failing. Not into danger. Those women trusted me. Tom Chen risked everything to help my story. I won't abandon them. Barlow placed a hand on her shoulder. We'll go together. The doc says Sam can travel by wagon if we're careful. My men can have one ready within the hour. I'm coming too, Sam insisted. You can barely sit up, Faith protested. Try to stop me. The steel in his voice reminded her why he'd become foreman at such a young age. We do this together or not at all. Doctor, Ward objected strenuously, but faced with Sam's determination and Barlow's influence, he finally agreed to release Sam for travel, providing detailed instructions for his care and a bottle of laudanum for the pain. They made a strange procession, leaving Cheyenne Sam lying in a wagon bed padded with blankets, Faith beside him, Barlow and 6 armed men riding escort, and the printing press secured in a second wagon. Faith had telegraphed ahead, warning Mary Patterson and the others, but she feared the message might arrive too late. As they rolled through the prairie, Sam reached for her hand. Whatever we're riding into, he said, we face it together. Promise me that. No running off alone to play hero. I promise, Faith said, meaning it. Together. The sun was setting as they crested the last hill before Promise Creek, painting the sky in the shades of orange and red that looked almost like fire. But as they drew closer, Faith realized with growing horror that the glow on the horizon wasn't entirely from the sunset. Part of Promise Creek was burning. The fire had been contained to the old saloon building next to where Faith's newspaper office once stood. But the message was clear. As their wagons rolled into Promise Creek, townspeople emerged from buildings and homes, their faces reflecting a mixture of fear, anger, and something new: determination. Mary Patterson rushed to meet them, soot smudging her face. Thank God you're back. They tried to burn us out. Faith, Hathaway's men set fire to the saloon, claiming it was a hazard. But we know the truth. They were trying to spread it to the other buildings, to drive out anyone who supported you. Is anyone hurt? Faith asked, climbing down from the wagon while Barlow's men carefully helped Sam. Tom Chen. Mary's voice cracked. They beat him when he tried to stop them from setting the fire. Dr. Pritchard's with him now. And Mrs. Henderson, her store windows were smashed when she refused to stop selling your papers. Faith felt rage building in her chest, hot and pure. Where's Hathaway now? In the church, holding a special service about cleansing the town of evil influences. Mary's expression was grim. But Faith, something's changed. People are angry. Even some who supported him before are asking questions. Sam, leaning heavily on 2 ranch hands but refusing to be carried, spoke up. Then maybe it's time to give them answers. Within an hour, the schoolhouse at Barlow Ranch had been transformed into a makeshift newspaper office. The new press was set up with remarkable speed by willing hands, and Faith found herself surrounded by supporters she hadn't even known existed. Mrs. Anderson had brought her husband's financial ledgers, revealing Hathaway's secret business dealings. Railroad workers who'd remained silent out of fear now stepped forward with testimonies. Even Sheriff Morrison arrived, looking ashamed and holding a folder. I've been a coward, he admitted to Faith. Let Hathaway intimidate me because he knew about my son's gambling debts. But attempted murder, burning buildings, that's too far. This is evidence I've been collecting quietly, records of bribes, threats, connections to the railroad company's worst practices. Faith looked at the growing mountain of evidence, then at the people gathered in the schoolhouse. We're going to print a special edition, she announced. Tonight, everything goes in the attack on Sam. The fire, the financial records, all of it. By morning, everyone in Promise Creek and beyond will know the truth about Reverend Hathaway. I'll help set type. Johnny volunteered eagerly. I'll handle the press, Sam said, though Faith could see the effort it cost him to stay upright. You'll sit and supervise, she said firmly. Doctor's orders. Through the night they worked, a community united in purpose. Mary Patterson and the women organized the testimonies. Barlow's ranch hand stood guard. Mrs. Anderson, who'd never done manual labor in her life, learned to sort type with surprising efficiency. Even Gruff Walter volunteered to ride to neighboring towns with copies once they were printed. Faith wrote with fierce clarity, laying out the web of corruption that had entangled Promise Creek. She documented Hathaway's financial stakes in the railroad company, his use of intimidation to control local businesses, the suffering of workers sacrificed for profit, and finally, the violence employed to silence opposition. This isn't just about one corrupt preacher, she wrote in her editorial. This is about a community deciding what it stands for, truth or lies, courage or cowardice, justice or oppression. Promise Creek stands at a crossroads, and the path we choose will define us for generations. As dawn broke, the first copies came off the press. Faith held one up, reading her headline, Corruption Exposed, How One Man's Greed Nearly Destroyed Promise Creek. It's perfect, Sam said from his chair, pale but proud. Hathaway won't be able to talk his way out of this. They distributed the papers with remarkable efficiency. By the time the sun was fully up, copies were in every store, on every doorstep, handed personally to anyone on the streets. Faith herself, accompanied by Barlow and several armed men, delivered a stack to the church where Hathaway was preparing for morning service. The Reverend emerged, his face cycling through shock, rage, and fear as he read, "Lies," he shouted. "All lies this Jezebel seeks to destroy." "Then prove it," Faith challenged, standing tall despite her exhaustion. "Sue me for libel. Take me to court. Let's examine all the evidence under oath." A crowd was gathering, papers in hand. Faith saw doubt in faces that had once shown only blind faith in their spiritual leader. "I have records." Mrs. Anderson called out, stepping forward. "Financial documents my husband kept, showing payments from Hathaway for keeping certain people from getting credit. I saw him meeting with those men who burned the saloon." Another voice added, "Young Timothy Morris, the sheriff's son. Heard him promise them money for cleansing the town." More voices joined in, a chorus of truth that had been suppressed too long. Hathaway backed toward the church doors, but found his path blocked by Tom Chen, bandaged but standing firm, flanked by a dozen railroad workers. "You called us animals," Chen said quietly. "Said we deserved whatever happened because we weren't really human. But we're human enough to recognize evil when we see it." Sheriff Morrison stepped forward, looking more like a lawman than he had in years. "Reverend Josiah Hathaway, you're under arrest for conspiracy, incitement to violence, and attempted murder." He glanced at Faith. "Miss O'Malley's provided enough evidence to ensure you'll stand trial." "You can't arrest me. I'm a man of God." "No," Sam said, having insisted on being present for this moment. "You're a man who used God as a shield for your greed. There's a difference." As Morrison led Hathaway away in shackles, the crowd began to disperse, but not before many approached Faith with words of thanks, apology, or support. The spell of fear that had held Promise Creek was broken. Later, in the schoolhouse, Faith sat beside Sam as doctor. Pritchard checked his bandages. The doctor, who'd maintained careful neutrality throughout the conflict, now spoke freely. "You did a brave thing, Miss O'Malley. Both of you. This town was sick with more than physical ailments. You provided the cure." "We just told the truth," Faith said, weariness finally catching up with her. "Sometimes," the doctor replied. "That's the bravest thing of all." Henry Barlow entered, a satisfied smile on his weathered face. "Just got word from Cheyenne. The territorial newspaper is picking up your story. Faith, they're calling for a full investigation into the railroad camps. Changes are coming." Faith felt Sam's hand find hers, their fingers intertwining. "Good changes, I hope." "The best kind," Barlow assured her. "The kind that happen when good people refuse to stay silent." As the sun set on Promise Creek, casting golden light through the schoolhouse windows, Faith looked around at the people who'd become her family. Sam, wounded but unbowed. Mary Patterson, organizing the next edition. Johnny, carefully cleaning type. The ranch hands who'd protected her. The women who'd found their voices. The Promise Creek Herald would publish its next regular edition on schedule. But more than that, a community had been reborn, finding its conscience and courage in the pages of a newspaper run by a woman the preacher had called a shame to the town. "What are you thinking?" Sam asked softly. Faith smiled, squeezing his hand. "That Reverend Hathaway was wrong. I'm not a shame to this town. Thanks to all of you, I'm exactly where I belong." Tomorrow would bring new challenges, a trial to cover, reforms to advocate for, a wedding to plan when Sam was healed. But tonight, surrounded by friends in a schoolhouse that smelled of fresh ink and possibility, Faith O'Malley knew she had found her home. The truth had set Promise Creek free, and there was no going back. Spring had come to Promise Creek, painting the prairie with wildflowers and filling the air with the scent of new beginnings. The town itself had undergone its own rebirth in the months since Reverend Hathaway's departure. His trial in Cheyenne had made territorial news, resulting in a 5-year prison sentence and sparking reforms in the railroad camps that saved countless lives. Faith stood by the window of the new Promise Creek Herald office, rebuilt in town, with funds raised by the community, watching Sam work with Johnny to load the wagon for deliveries. His movements were sure and strong again, the only reminder of his ordeal a slight stiffness on cold mornings. "Wool gathering again," Mary Patterson teased, entering with a basket of fresh bread from the bakery. She'd become Faith's assistant editor, her sharp mind and fearless spirit invaluable to the paper's continued success. "Just thinking how much has changed," Faith replied. "A year ago, you were afraid to speak to me in public." "A year ago, I was a different woman," Mary said simply. "We all were." The bell above the door chimed, and Faith turned to see someone unexpected. Reverend Michael Davis, the young minister who'd taken over Hathaway's position. Unlike his predecessor, Davis believed in service over judgment, compassion over control. "Miss O'Malley." he said warmly. I wanted to discuss that article about the new school. Several parishioners are eager to contribute. Faith smiled. The new school was her latest campaign education for all children in Promise Creek. Regardless of their parents' ability to pay, that's wonderful news. Reverend, education is the best investment a community can make. Agreed. And speaking of investments, Davis's eyes twinkled. I understand congratulations are in order. Sam mentioned you've set a date. Faith felt warmth bloom in her cheeks. Next month, the wildflowers should be at their peak. I'd be honored to perform the ceremony, if you'll have me. We'd like that very much. After Davis left, Faith returned to her desk, working on an editorial about the proposed women's suffrage amendment. Wyoming Territory had led the way, and she believed Promise Creek should formally support the movement. As she wrote, she smiled, remembering how scandalized people had been by a woman running a newspaper. Now, half her subscribers were women who'd found their own voices. Faith! Johnny burst through the door, eyes shining with excitement. Sam says to come quick, something's happening down by the creek. Alarmed, Faith grabbed her shawl and followed Johnny through town. A crowd had gathered near the water, but the atmosphere was celebratory rather than concerned. She pushed through to find Sam standing beside Henry Barlow, both men grinning. What's going on? She asked. Sam took her hand, leading her to the creek bank. There, driven into the soft earth, stood a new sign, Faith O'Malley Bridge, connecting our community since 1874. The town council voted unanimously. Barlow explained. This new bridge you campaigned for, linking the main town with the homesteads across the creek, it seemed only fitting to name it after the woman who's done more to bridge divides than anyone else in Promise Creek. Faith felt tears sting her eyes. I don't know what to say. Say you'll keep doing what you've been doing. Mrs. Anderson said, stepping forward. Her husband's business had struggled initially after Hathaway's fall, but honest dealings had eventually brought greater prosperity than corruption ever had. Keep telling the truth. Keep fighting for what's right. Always, Faith promised. As the crowd dispersed, Sam and Faith walked along the creek bank, finding the quiet spot where they'd often come to talk during his recovery. The same spot where, just last week, he'd formally proposed with his mother's ring a simple pearl that Faith treasured more than any diamond. No regrets, Sam asked, as he often did, still amazed that this remarkable woman had chosen him. Only one, Faith said, turning to face him. That it took me so long to realize what you told the whole town that day in front of the church. What's that? That you were right. I am the only blessing this town needed, not because I'm special, but because one person standing up for truth gave others permission to do the same. She reached up to touch his face. But you're the only blessing I need. Sam Garrett, you gave me courage when I had none, strength when I was breaking, and love when I thought I'd have to choose between my calling and my heart. Sam kissed her beneath the cottonwoods, while the creek murmured its approval and meadowlarks sang in the distance. When they parted, he kept her close, resting his forehead against hers. Ready to head back. We've got a newspaper to get out, and I heard Tom Chen has news from the railroad camps about the new safety measures. In a moment, Faith said, wanting to hold on to this perfect instant. Sam, do you remember what Hathaway called me that first day? A shame to the town, Sam said, his voice hardening at the memory. And do you remember what you said? A slow smile spread across his face. That you were the only blessing I needed. You saw the truth before anyone else, even me. No, Sam corrected gently. I saw a brave woman fighting alone and decided she shouldn't have to. The truth was always in you. Faith, I just had the good sense to recognize it. They walked back toward town hand in hand, past the new school site, past Henderson's store where her newspapers sold beside the Denver papers, past the church where Reverend Davis preached inclusion rather than exclusion. Promise Creek had become what Faith had always believed it could be, a community where truth mattered more than power. where courage was valued over conformity. A month later, on a perfect May morning with wildflowers carpeting the prairie, Faith O'Malley married Sam Garrett at the Barlow Ranch. The ceremony was held outdoors, with the whole community in attendance, ranchers and railroad workers, townspeople and homesteaders, all united in celebrating love's triumph over hate. Mary Patterson served as matron of honor, while Johnny Summers proudly stood as Sam's best man. Henry and Maria Barlow hosted the reception, and even Mrs. Anderson helped serve cake with genuine warmth. As the sun set over their wedding celebration, Faith and Sam stole a moment alone on the ranch house porch. The Promise Creek Herald would resume publication tomorrow. Faith had already written an editorial about the power of community, but tonight was for them. "Happy?" Sam asked, pulling her close. "Beyond words," Faith replied. "And that's saying something for a newspaper editor." He laughed, the sound rich and warm. "What's next, Mrs. Garrett? Now that you've reformed Promise Creek, exposed corruption, started a school, and gotten yourself respectably married?" Faith considered the question, looking out over the town that had become her home. "There are still stories to tell, injustices to expose, truths to print. The Herald has requests for subscriptions from 3 neighboring towns. Women are writing to ask for advice about starting their own newspapers. And..." She placed his hand on her still flat stomach. "There might be a new story beginning right here." Sam's eyes widened with joy and wonder. "Faith, I saw Dr. Pritchard yesterday. He confirmed it, so we'd better add a nursery to that house we're planning to build by the creek." As Sam spun her around in celebration, Faith laughed, thinking how far they'd all come. The preacher who'd called her a shame to the town was gone, replaced by voices of progress and hope. The newspaper he'd tried to destroy now helped shape the territory's future, and the woman he'd tried to silence had found not just her voice, but a chorus of others raised alongside hers. The Promise Creek Herald would continue its mission, with Faith at the helm and Sam by her side. There would be challenges ahead, there always were for those who fought for truth and justice, but surrounded by love, supported by community, and armed with the power of the press, Faith O'Malley Garrett knew they could face whatever came. After all, she was no shame to the town. She was its conscience, its courage, and as Sam had known from the beginning, its blessing. And that was a story worth telling for generations to come. Thank you so much for listening to this story of courage, love, and the power of truth in the Old West. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Please share in the comments below so we can connect and discuss what this tale meant to you. If you enjoyed Faith and Sam's journey, please subscribe to Wild West Stories 1850. Give this video a like, and don't forget to hit the hype button so more people can discover these inspiring stories from America's frontier. Until next time, partners.